Alright guys, so this is your first video quiz. What I'm going to do for these quizzes is I'm going to give you an example and then I'm going to ask you a question that is very similar to the example. And it's going to be a multiple choice question and you get to choose the correct answer. Yes, these are graded, however the grade is not a large portion, so if you don't do that well, it's okay. And also we will discuss things that you can do later to maybe make up a quiz that you didn't do so well on, or we'll talk about this later, but don't freak out if you don't do so hot the first time. You'll get used to this. Okay, so first I do want to remind you about the order of operations. Order of operations is what makes us do the same math all over the world. So don't forget, whenever you do the order of operations, you need to do parentheses or other grouping symbols first. And you always work from the innermost parentheses to the outermost. The next step would be doing your exponents. Then you have to do multiplication and division in order from left to right. So don't do multiplication before division unless it occurs on the left of it. So read it from left to right, do multiplication and division in that same step. Same thing with addition and subtraction. So you're going to do that last, but work that in order from left to right. Alright, so check out this problem. So we've got really the same numbers being used, it's just look at the difference that the grouping symbols make. In the first one, I actually do the 3 times 7 first because we do multiplication before we do addition. So this would be 4 plus 21, which is 25. In the second one, because the 4 plus 3 is in grouping symbols, I have to do that first. So 4 plus 3 is 7 times 7, which is an answer of 49. Alright, so here's your first question. Do your best. You are welcome to use a calculator. Just do your best and let's see how this works out. Alright, so this one's a little bit more involved. So again, we're going to do our grouping symbols first. So I'm going to do 5 minus 2 first. I'm just rewriting everything else. Now we have to look and see what operations do we have. Well, right here we have division, right here we have addition, and right here we have multiplication. So we want to do multiplication and division in order from left to right. So I'm actually going to do this first. So 18 divided by 6 is 3. And next, I want to do multiplication before I do addition. So I have to do this next. So that winds up giving me 3 plus 12, and you get an answer of 15. All right, so try this next problem. Okay, so on this one, we are evaluating the following expression. 10x minus 3y when x equals 5 and y equals 2. So that means I'm going to put in 5 where I see x, and I'm going to put the 2 in where I see y. Now this doesn't mean 1, 0, then 5. It doesn't mean 105. What it means is 10 times 5 minus 3 times 2. Okay? So we're going to multiply there. 10 times 5 is 50 minus, and I can go ahead and do this. 3 times 2 is 6. 50 minus 6 is 44. Alright, so check out this. We are translating the following phrases into an algebraic expression. The sum of a number and 4. I don't know what that number is right there, so I'm just going to call it x. You could call it any letter of the alphabet you want. Sum means addition, so the sum of a number and 4. This is as good as that thing gets. I can't do anything else to it unless I know what x is. And in this case, I don't. Okay, so this says the difference of 7 and 3. Difference means subtraction. So I would do 7 minus 3. And I can actually do that math because there's no variable in there. So 7 minus 3 is 4. But what I would be looking for is I would be looking for this right here. And then this, of course, is just that simplified. On the next one, the product of a number and 9. I don't know what that number is, so I'm going to call it x. And you can write it like this, x times 9. I really do prefer for you to write it like this, 9x. That means 9 times x. And remember, with multiplication, order doesn't matter. Same thing with addition. You could have written the top one as 4 plus x, because with addition and multiplication, order does not matter. Now, order does matter greatly with subtraction and division. All right, so this last one, the quotient of a number x and 8. So quotient means divide, so you could write it like this, or you could write it like this, and this is actually the way that I prefer. I like that the best. All right, so these are just some problems to solve for. Now, it is super important that you know how to show your work, and I do grade your work, so make sure that whenever you're taking a test for me that you show your steps. X minus 18 equals 23. What do you have to do to solve it? You have to do the opposite, so you would add 18 to both sides. You always have to do the opposite. This right here creates 0. A negative 18 and a positive 18 create 0. So on the left side, I'm left with x is equal to 3 plus 8 is 1. I had to carry my 1, so I got 41. X is equal to 41 here. Now on this next one, I'm adding to the variable. So to undo addition, I have to subtract. What you do to one side, you have to do the identical thing to the other side. So m is equal to 12 here. All right, so these problems, these are absolute values. Whenever you see the vertical bars like that, those are absolute values. An absolute value is a distance that a number is from 0. So absolute values can never ever be negative unless your negative sign is on the outside of the bars, okay? So let's look at this one. I'm comparing 3 to the absolute value of 3. Well, the absolute value of 3 is just 3. So I'm comparing 3 and 3. Well, those are equal to each other. So I would say those are equal. The next one, I'm comparing negative 4 to the absolute value of negative 4. So I'm comparing negative 4 to, how far is negative 4 from 0? It's 4. So now which one is greater? Positive numbers are always greater than negative numbers. All right, so now on this one I'm comparing 8. Notice how this negative sign is on the outside of the bars. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take the absolute value of 8, which is positive 8, then multiply it times your negative. So now I'm comparing 8 to negative 8, and the positive number is always bigger. All right, these are called exponents. So on this one, the top one, it means 3 times 3, which is 9. This next one, this means that we're also going to square the negative, so it means negative 3 times negative 3, which is also positive 9. This last one, notice how the negative sign is not in parentheses. So what this means is I'm taking negative times 3 times 3. So in this case, I actually get an answer of negative 9. All right, so we're going to evaluate the given expression. So I've got negative 4. Instead of x, I'm going to put in 3 there. And then I'm going to square that. Remember, we do our grouping symbols first, and then we do our exponent. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. And I've got negative 12 squared, which is negative 12 times negative 12, which is positive 144. All right, the temperature in Anchorage was negative 2 degrees Fahrenheit at 8 a.m. By noon, the temperature had risen 12 degrees Fahrenheit. What was the temperature at noon? So if it had risen, that means it went up, so we're going to add negative 2 plus 12, and I get a positive 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so whenever you multiply fractions, you can reduce before you multiply. You can reduce diagonally or you can reduce vertically, but you cannot reduce left and right horizontally. So for this one, I'm going to reduce the 2 and the 32. I divided both of those by 2. That's where I got the 1 and the 16 from. And the 9 and the 45, those I'm going to divide both of those by 9. So now don't forget your negative sign. Negative times a positive is going to be a negative answer. And with multiplication, you multiply straight across. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 16 is 16. That's my final answer. Now with dividing, you can't just divide mixed numbers. You have to actually turn them into improper fractions first. So I would do 3 times 8 is 24, plus 2 is 26 over 3, divided by 12 times 1 is 12, plus 1 is 13. Now, with division, you have to keep the first one the same, change your sign to multiplication, and flip your second one. Now we can see if we can divide. Let's reduce a little bit. The 26 and the 13 can both be divided by 13. And the 3 and the 12 can both be divided by 3. And now I multiply straight across. 2 times 4 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. And that is just an answer of 8. Okay, now don't forget that whenever you add and subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So these guys are the same. The denominator is already common. So I just subtract the numerators. 5 minus 2 is 3. Now, this answer needs to be reduced. You always reduce your answers if possible. They both have a factor of 3, so let's divide the top and the bottom by 3. And I get an answer of 1/3. Now the second one, you have to have a common denominator. The common number, the lowest common denominator between 5 and 4 is 20. So I had to multiply 5 by 4. So I got to multiply the numerator by 4. So I get 12 right there. So 3/5 turned into 12/20. This one I had to multiply the denominator by 5, so I would need to multiply the numerator by 5. So I get 5/20 there. Now I can add straight across. 12 plus 5 is 17. You do not add or subtract your denominators, just your numerators. And that thing cannot be simplified further. Alright, take a look at this one. What's happening to our variable? It's being subtracted. So that means we need to add 6/7 to both sides. That creates 0, so I'm left with just plain old x right there. Now 2/3 plus 6/7. I need a common denominator. So I think 21 is going to be it. I had to multiply 7 by 3 to get 21, so I've got to multiply this by 3. So I get 18 there. I had to multiply this by 7, so I've got to multiply this by 7. So now I need to add 14 plus 18 is 32 over 21. And actually that can't be reduced. Now you could give me 1 and 11/21, but I actually like 32 over 21 better. Improper fractions are great. Mixed numbers, you can only add and subtract with mixed numbers. Improper fractions, you can actually add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So I do like that better. But if you were to give me 1 and 11/21, I would not mark it wrong. Alright, so what does this mean? This means 0.3 times 0.3. Here, we'll just use parentheses. I don't like the dots here. 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. And it's multiplied times itself 5 times. You know what? The easiest thing to do here is grab your calculator and put in parenthesis 0.3, close your parenthesis, do the little rooftop button, looks like a rooftop, and then we're going to type in 5 and hit enter, and I get this as an answer, 0.00243. That's my answer. All right, for this problem here, what's happening to my variable? It's being added to 4.9, so I want to undo addition with subtraction. So subtract 4.9 from both sides. So I get that m is equal to, now on my calculator, again, I do a lot of stuff with the calculator because it's just easier. So I'm going to type in 6.76 minus 4.9, and I get, whoops, I dropped my calculator, 1.86. And that's my final answer. Okay, so whenever you're rounding a number to the nearest whatever, here's what you want to do. So if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, I underline the tenths place and I look at the number immediately to the right. If that number is 5 or greater, you round this 3 up. So rounded to the nearest tenth would be 19.4. You don't have to put any zeros afterwards. This is a perfectly good answer. Okay, so now let's round to the hundredths place. So I'm going to underline the hundredths place and I'm going to look at the number immediately to the right of it. Because it's not 5 or greater, I don't have to round that number up, so I just get 19.37. And notice I drop everything else. I don't have to put a 0 there. That's because it's to the right of the decimal. If it were to the left of the decimal, I would have to put zeros, but when it's to the right of the decimal, you don't. So now if I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, so again, I go back to my original number, I'm underlining my whole number, and I look at the number immediately to the right. It is not 5 or greater, so I don't have to round up, so my answer is simply 19. All right, for this problem right here, what's happening to my variable? It's being multiplied by negative 8.4. How do you undo multiplication? You undo multiplication with division. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 8.4. So I'm typing in 50.4 on my calculator divided by negative 8.4, and I get that x is equal to positive 6. That's my answer. Alright, so our last problem here. You have test scores of 87, 89, and 79. What is your average? Another word for average is the mean. Is it possible for you to have an A for the class if you need at least a 90% to get an A? Well, let's look. To find the average, first we want to add these guys up. 87, 89, 79. Okay, whenever I add those up, again, I'm just going to use my calculator. 87 plus 89 plus 79. I get 255. Now that's not my average. Now I have to divide by 3. So, again, on my calculator, 255 divided by 3, and I get this answer. 85. So 85%. Now, the next part of the question says, is it possible for you to have an A for the class if you need at least a 90% to get an A? Well, you only have an 85%. You have not met the 90% requirement, so no, it's not possible for you to get an A. The other thing, too, I want you guys to realize that your averages, you can never get anything higher than your highest test grade. So if your highest test grade is an 89, it's not possible for your average to be higher than that. It's also not possible for your average to be lower than your lowest. So your average is going to be somewhere in the middle of those two. I hope that makes sense. All right, so that's it for your first quiz. Hope you did great. If you didn't, let's have a conversation about it and see what we can do to make that better. Because honestly, what you have just seen is you have seen nearly every test question on your first test. So I hope that this was a good review for you. And if not, let's look at some places where you can improve. And if you need help, please talk to me.